It had been a long day. I'd been in the city since early morning, attending business meetings and running errands. I was pleased to finally leave the chaos and bustle behind me and head out to my home in the country. I didn't often spend an entire day in the city, but when I did, I knew why I'd opted for a rural lifestyle. I had scarcely left the bright city lights behind when I ran into a deep fog. I wasn't too concerned. I lived in an area that was prone to fog. To tell the truth, I quite enjoyed the atmosphere a fog brings with it. Mist is eerie, but I also find it incredibly peaceful. I lived approximately 40 minutes from the city boundary. Generally, I liked to listen to the radio on the drive home. However, I was unable to find my favorite radio station this evening. Instead, all I heard was static. I figured the fog was at fault, and I switched the radio off. I wasn't paying too much attention to the road. I knew the route well, could probably drive it with my eyes closed. I was driving at a safe speed due to the fog and I had both hands on the steering wheel, but I allowed my mind to drift. The motorbike came out of nowhere. It roared out of the fog behind me and passed close to my car, abruptly wrenching me out of my daydreams. My heart was pounding, and I probably dropped a few choice curse words. I paid more attention to the road after that. The fog wasn't quite so dense now, and I knew I was close to the small township near my house. I lived up a steep hill that was located behind the township, a place that gave me a fantastic vantage point when the weather was clear. I passed through the township. It was a sleepy community, and many of the house lights had already been dimmed. My mind jumped ahead as I thought longingly of getting home, making a hot drink, and putting my feet up. I left the township behind and began to drive up the hill. There were only a few houses up here, and I couldn't see my closest neighbors from my house. I liked it that way. As I've already said, I liked the country lifestyle. I was perhaps 5 minutes from home when I saw it. A tall, thin, dark figure loped across the field at the side of the road. Without hesitating, it stepped out onto the road in front of the car. Shocked, I hit the brakes. The figure slowly turned its head and stared right at me. It was huge, at least 10 feet tall. It was black all over, and it didn't appear to be wearing the type of clothes that I recognized. If anything, it was dressed in a skin-tight suit that left its hands and long fingers free. My heart was pounding, and I could scarcely breathe. After what felt like forever, the figure calmly turned away. It loped across the road, into the field, and disappeared. I couldn't help myself. I jumped out of the car and ran to the side of the road to the spot where I'd last seen the figure. It was gone. Suddenly spooked, I jumped back in the car and raced home. I ran inside, locked all the doors, and peered nervously through the living room window. I could see the road from here, and to the fields beyond. I didn't see the figure again that night, and I haven't seen it since. I can't explain what I saw, but I can say that I'm glad it never came back.
When we were kids, our grandfather bought an old farmhouse. Looking back now, it was probably more of a shack than a house, but we loved it. It was a large property with plenty of land for kids to explore. The fact that the wind whistled through the cracks in the farmhouse walls didn't bother us. Our grandfather was happy for us to run around and go wherever we liked. The only warning he gave us was, "Don't cross the boundary fence. Stay on the property." He would give us this instruction with a frown that showed us he meant business. But being kids, we didn't take too much notice of warnings. One day, bored and looking for adventure, my brother Tom suggested we should go and explore the old shed. The only problem was, the old shed he was talking about was on the other side of the boundary fence. I was scared about what my grandfather might say if he found out, but I was even more scared of Tom calling me a wussy or a girl. Reluctantly, I agreed to climb the fence. Our grandfather's old dog, Crouchet, who was never far from our sides, followed us to the fence. When he saw what we were about to do, he growled low in his throat. With one last pat for the dog, I swallowed hard and followed Tom over the fence. The old shed looked even spookier up close. From where I stood, inside the open doorway, looked as black as midnight. I looked nervously back over at our grandfather's house. The sun was just beginning to sink behind the treetops. At that stage, I would have been happy for our grandfather to step outside and yell at us for disobeying him. "It stinks!" Tom was already inside the shed. I couldn't see him, but I sure could hear him. Something must have died in here. I took one step toward the shed, and that's when it happened. A terrible scream hit the air, the sound lifting the hairs on the back of my neck and loosening my bowels. The dog went off on a loud volley of barking, and that dog never barked. I never said I was a brave kid. I turned and ran for the fence, but Tom was faster. He shot past me, flew over the fence, and kept running once he hit the other side. I was right behind him. I ran for the farmhouse with the dog at my heels. I was too afraid to look back at the shed, and I swear Tom never once turned his head to look. If our grandfather thought we were quiet that night, he didn't say anything. Our parents came the next day to collect us as our vacation was over. Our grandfather sold the farmhouse soon after. Tom and I have never once discussed what happened that day, or spoken about what he saw in the shed. I'd rather not know.
We spent a few nights in Brisbane, Australia a few years ago. My husband and I traveled a lot at the time, and we preferred to avoid the big hotel chains. Cute and quirky little bed and breakfast offerings were more our style. We felt they gave us a greater appreciation of local culture. I'd found us a place close to the city that seemed perfect for us. The owner had even used the word quirky in his ad for the room. It was a gray, cool day when we arrived. As our cab pulled up outside, I immediately noticed something strange about the house. I feel foolish saying this, but I guess I'll have to go ahead and just say it. That house seemed to throb with a life of its own. I know throb is a strange word to use for a house, but I can think of no better way to describe it. The exterior was painted the color of a beating heart, and the building had a liveliness about it that made it stand out. Thrilled with our find, we collected our bags and walked up to the door. The owner greeted us warmly and invited us in. The interior of the house lived up to my expectations. It was somehow gloomy but intriguing at the same time, and it was crammed full of treasures. As the owner led us up the stairs to our room, he explained that he was a keen collector of oddities. He had acquired knickknacks from all over the world. The owner told us we were welcome to explore the house as long as we didn't venture into his private quarters. He pointed out a small table containing refreshments and said he would leave us to rest. Our room was a delight. It was situated at the top of the house and contained a large black-framed bed and a small sitting room area. Books, ornaments, pictures, and small treasures filled every available space. I was keen to explore the house. My husband was tired from our travels and wanted to nap, but he agreed to look around with me. We planned to have an early night and go sightseeing in the morning. The house was truly an Aladdin's cave. It was more of a museum than a house, and I could have spent hours wandering around the rooms. However, we soon retired to our bedroom to rest. We anticipated a busy day ahead of us tomorrow, and we would need our energy for sightseeing. The big black bed was comfortable, and my husband was soon snoring. However, I felt too wired to sleep. I lay awake, staring up at the ceiling and imagining I could feel the heartbeat of the house. I must have eventually fallen asleep, but I was suddenly woken with a jolt. I sat up in bed. The room was in darkness save for a soft green light coming from a lamp in the corner. My husband continued to snore peacefully beside me. Feeling uneasy but not sure why, I lay back down. I did not know what had woken me. I closed my eyes only to quickly open them again. I was suddenly certain there was someone in the room with us. I was about to scream out my husband's name, but the words caught in my throat. A woman with long, thick hair and wild, staring eyes was suddenly leaning over me. I was horrified to see that her eyes were completely black. I lay still, frozen in terror. The woman and I locked eyes and stared at each other for what felt like forever. I couldn't breathe, couldn't speak. I was certain I was going to die. I don't know what happened next. Perhaps I blinked. Anyway, the woman was gone. I found my voice and nearly screamed the house down. My husband jumped out of bed and immediately slumped back down again, staring blearily at the wall. What? What is it? I tried to explain about the woman, but nothing made sense. I could tell my husband thought I'd had a nightmare, but I know what I saw. The woman was real, and she had been right there beside the bed. Neither of us got much sleep for what remained of that night. We checked out early the next morning. We didn't stay for breakfast.
A few years ago, my friend Jerry and I were keen campers. We're outdoorsy people. We both like to fish and hunt. On this particular weekend, we were camping at a spot near a river. We were on private land, but Jerry had permission from the farmer for us to stay there. It was a nice place to stay. Quiet, secluded, and scenic. On the first day, we each caught a fish from the nearby river, so we were pretty happy. We had fish cooked on the campfire that evening, sitting under the stars. I had a great night's sleep, and I think Jerry did the same. We went fishing again the next morning, but the fish weren't biting. After lunch, Jerry suggested we should go exploring. The farmer had said we were free to roam, just as long as we didn't disturb anything. As we walked across the fields, Jerry told me a little about the history of the property. A farmhouse had been built down near the river in the late 1800s, although a fire had burned it to the ground at some stage. They say the guy who lived in the farmhouse was a violent man. His wife lived in fear. Jerry shook his head in disgust. We reached the place where the farmhouse had once stood. I poked around in the long grass and soon found the crumbling foundations. At that moment, a sudden wind sprang up. It whistled eerily through the treetops. The sound sent a chill down my spine. Jerry shivered. Why do I have the uncomfortable feeling that someone is watching us? I had the same feeling. I found myself mentally calculating how long it would take to pack up our campsite and leave, which was strange. We were used to being in remote places. "Look," Jerry said hoarsely, "look!" I stood and stared in shock. From some distance away, the grass was parting and something huge was rushing toward us. The only problem was the huge something couldn't be seen. "Run!" Jerry screamed. "Run!" I didn't need to be told. I was already running. We've never packed up a campsite so fast. We couldn't wait to get out of there. Jerry spoke for both of us when he said on the way home, "I think we disturbed whatever it was the farmer warned us not to disturb."
When I was first married, my husband worked as a farmhand. He had the type of contract where accommodation was always supplied with the job. Some of the old houses we lived in were far from ideal, and we often had to move with very short notice. However, I got used to it. Moving house was just part of his job. One of the houses we moved into was worse than all the others. I hated it on sight. Just walking inside the door gave me the creeps. My husband assured me I would soon get used to it. He hugged me and told me it wouldn't take much to make the house our own. Just a few nice personal touches would make all the difference. I wish it was as easy as that. I was home alone a lot while my husband worked on the farm, and I never did get used to that house. One day while my husband was at work, I was in the kitchen baking when I heard a voice behind me. "Hello?" I spun around, my heart pounding. There was no one there. On top of that, it was a distinctive female voice. There weren't many females on this farm, besides me and the farmer's wife. Puzzled, I went outside to check. There was no one to be seen. The sun was beginning to go down, and there was a definite chill in the air. "Hello?" The voice spoke again, but this time it was behind me. The voice was coming from inside the house. I hesitated, unsure what to do. I didn't want to go and get my husband. He would probably tell me I was being silly. I took a tentative step inside the door. Oh, the voice didn't sound unfriendly. That was when I saw her. An old lady was standing in the hallway. She looked approachable and kindly, but that wasn't my concern. What worried me was the way she seemed to shimmer. My stomach clenched. I knew without a doubt that I was standing face to face with a ghost. I wasn't as scared as I probably should have been. She spoke, although the words seemed to be coming from inside my head rather than from her lips. "The wiring, dearie. You need to get the wiring checked." And then she vanished. I'll cut a long story short now. Of course, my husband didn't believe me when I told him, and it took a lot of convincing on my part to get him to call an electrician. The electrician solemnly told us that most of the wiring had been destroyed by rats. The entire place could have gone up in flames at any moment. We had to move out of the house while maintenance was carried out. The farmer found my husband work at a neighboring farm, and we moved into yet another old farmhouse. We never did end up going back to the spooky house. And even though I hated that house, I will always be grateful to the kindly old lady ghost.